The 1992 Los Angeles Uprising, the Cambodian genocide, Japanese American incarceration. What you know isn't always the full story. Our new podcast, Inheriting, about Asian American and Pacific Islander families where the past is personal.
Korean Americans, we call it 사이구.
Did you ever realize when you were a child that you became an orphan?
Camp was such a hard time. How do you think you got through it?
Listen to Inheriting from LAist Studios and the NPR network, wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
And hey, welcome to Books and Boba, a book club and podcast featuring books by Asian and Asian American authors. My name is Marvin Yue.
And I'm Rira Yu.
And we are here with an author chat with Aurora Palit about her debut romantic comedy novel, Sunshine and Spice, available now at booksellers everywhere. As always, Books and Boba is supported in part by our listeners over on Patreon. So if you'd like to become a bigger part of our book club, head on over to patreon.com/booksandboba, where you can gain access to our members-only Discord server, as well as our monthly bonus podcast Boba Chats, which we just had a really great episode come out as well.
Yeah, but we had also a great conversation with Aurora. We talked about fake dating tropes and the grumpy sunshine tropes. We talked about how it feels to be an outsider within our own ethnic communities, breaking toxic cycles in our family structures. Yeah, a lot of very heavy topics, but also some fun light topics as well.
Yeah, so please enjoy our conversation with Aurora.
We are here with Aurora Palit to talk about her debut novel, Sunshine and Spice, a story about two complete opposites who agree to fake date in order to solve their cultural dilemmas. And of course, we're going to get more into that later in this conversation. But welcome to the show, Aurora.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So I want to start our chat with a little bit of an icebreaker. Your character, Naomi, in your book, Sunshine and Spice, she is a really big Olympics spectator. And considering that the Olympics just ended and the Paralympics is wrapping up as well, do you have a favorite Olympic sport that you like to watch?
Yeah, I am a big... I mean, there's so many. That's like the best of the best. And I'm sitting on my couch eating licorice, as Naomi did, watching them compete. I love the fan favorites like gymnastics. That's always so fun to watch. But I have a soft spot for swimming. I used to be a competitive swimmer, in my formative years. And so I love it. I watched it with my kids this year and they're like, this is so boring. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. This is great. So, yeah.
This is the one time we get to be patriotic.
Yeah, exactly.
They weren't into the drama of these really close races and all these people I feel like swimming, especially it's one of those sports where the crowd really gets you into it.
Yeah, I feel like the only one they really connected with, I have two boys who are 7 and under, was fencing. And then they'd start grabbing random kitchen tools and do the same. So the Olympics were dangerous this year in my household.
That's awesome.
I'm more of a Winter Olympics person, and my sport to watch is figure skating. So when the Summer Olympics was happening, Marvin was like, "Are you going to tune in?" And I'm like, "I don't know, man. Summer Olympics is not really my thing, but I'll tune in for the big sports, I guess, like gymnastics, like Marvin mentioned." But yeah.
Yeah. Well, we like to start off our author chats by learning more about our author. So I saw in your bio that you grew up in rural Alberta in Canada. Happy to see. I'm also, okay. So Rira makes fun of me because culturally I am American because I grew up here. But I was born in Toronto. I was born in Canada. So technically we are countrymen.
I know, and I love this fact.
Yeah, tell us how you came to become a published author. What was your journey like?
I read so many people's journeys. I've heard a lot of them. and I feel awful about mine because I really never thought I would end up here. I read a ton as a kid. One of those kids whose parents were like, she's reading, that's awesome. And they weren't monitoring what I was reading. And I probably read things I shouldn't at a very young age. But yeah, I read a lot of books, but I didn't really read a lot of books by people, like I would say people like myself, South Asian people. I certainly never read books with main characters who are South Asian or even like side characters. So I never really pictured myself being a writer. That felt like I don't know, something that wasn't really available to me as a child. And then you kind of put it out of your mind. But then I've always felt like I have stories inside myself, but I wasn't writing them down. And then one day, one story was kind of haunting me, and I was telling my coworker about it, and she's lovely, but she's very impatient. And she was just like, you should just shut up about it and write it. And I was like, okay. So that's what I did. It didn't go anywhere. I was very new, did not know anything about like acts and all those things that need to go into a story to make it a story, but I did it. And I don't know, then you meet writing people. And I think that's really what's pushed me forward is the writing community, specifically the romance writing community is so supportive. They're just helpful and they cheer you on, and they've really pushed me forward to kind of take those steps. And one thing led to another, and here I am. It's been really because of them. I owe them a lot.
Yeah. So I'm always curious because there's so many, like you mentioned, there's so many different paths in the journey to become a writer. Where did you go to, I guess, learn the craft? Was it just through reading, or did you take any classes? Did you do any like seminars or workshops, or like what was your training like?
I'm not going to say I'm against writing courses. I did take one in university and it crushed me. It was awful. I did not do well. I did not feel like I had any talent. So thankfully, that's just a traumatic memory I don't talk about much. But I guess I craft books, I think. And really, I feel writing gets better. The inspiration, the ideas, they become stronger as you read other people's work, especially other people who are also in the manuscript phase, and giving them critique, receiving critique. That's how I feel I've learned a lot. And I listen to podcasts. I listen to your podcasts with other authors talking about their work. And I find it really helps.
Also, it helps that in the romance genre itself, there seems to be a growing number of South Asian romance authors who are really hitting it out of the park, like Alicia Rai, Sonali Dev, Sonia Singh. And it's wow, this is a subgenre now. And it's not just, arranged marriage stories, although they do take a bulk of the shelf. You see a lot of slices of different diasporas, even in Indian culture. So it's been really nice to see. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts. When you were starting to write, was seeing that, was that community already there? Or as you were writing, you realized that, oh, there are other people like me who are writing stories with people who look like us?
Yeah, prior to beginning my writing journey, I had read a little bit. One that stands out to me is Farah Heron. She's also from Canada. I read one of her novels. It's a little bit older now. It was called The Chai Factor. And it was kind of the first time I read a novel that I identified with the South Asian discussion happening there, with the racism and living in Canada and just the expectations that, a person might feel living in two worlds kind of thing. So, but the thing is, I feel like authors are really starting to push the envelope in the South Asian romance community. They're branching out. They're writing fantasy. They're retelling Indian epics. It's just a lot of really cool, creative things are happening right now. And I feel like we all have these different narratives to share, and it's just really lovely to see. It's not a monolith. It feels like we're just branching out and doing really great things right now.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see. As someone who has been doing this podcast for close to 8 years now, it's really encouraging to see like other authors from all walks of life make it to the shelf. But from the title of your debut book alone, we can guess that there's a grumpy sunshine romance trope there. What was your favorite part of writing into that trope? And do you have any other romance tropes that you are interested in writing in the future?
I really like writing banter. And when you get to write banter involving a guy who, admittedly has a little bit of grumpy old man energy, I think that's so fun. It's just a delight because you get to kind of put outlandish things coming out of his mouth. He's also like very awkward and always says the wrong thing. So it made it very enjoyable to, put him in terrible situations and watch him like mangle his way out of it. As far as tropes go, I love them all. And I love to like kind of make them weird, I guess, a little bit, because romance, I think, allows you to really do strange things. I mean, the writers and readers that I meet, the more unhinged things get, the more excited they seem to grow. So, this one has the grumpy sunshine kind of trope. It also has the matchmaking trope. And yeah, it was just a lot of fun to write.
Yeah, I mean, I guess another term for grumpy sunshine would be like golden retriever and black cat. And it's always like fun to see different iterations of that. Sometimes the woman is like the black cat and it's just like, oh, this time around though, like you have the male love interest who is like a total grumpy grandpa, and I just love the dynamic because it does make for really good banter. Can you tell us just a little bit about Sunshine and Spice for those who have not heard about the book, like a short elevator pitch?
Sure. And the premise is we have Naomi, who's a brand consultant, and she has a little bit of a sad backstory. She's estranged from her family, and just a terrible falling out between her mother and her grandparents. So she doesn't know much about South Asian culture. She doesn't know much about her family, doesn't have, a lineage she can refer to when, thinking about her family, her culture. And she lands an opportunity to brand a South Asian business that's kind of been forgotten about for a while in Kelowna, which is in Canada. For those who don't know, it's a really nice place, but it kind of has this small town vibe to it in a really lovely way. But it's also a huge tourist spot, and there's a lot of gentrification going on. And so in this environment, there's a lot of pressure on Naomi to succeed, and she doesn't know much about the cultural expectations that the business owner wants for her rebranded business. So she links up with Dave, who is the owner's son, and they decide to fake date in order to kind of teach and help Naomi bring the business up to where it needs to be. And then she, on the other hand, will help him with his mother's very stubborn and aggressive matchmaking ploys.
Yeah, I think what was most compelling about your story to me as a reader was that you juxtaposed Naomi's longing for connection with the Bengali community because she was kind of robbed of that because of her estranged family, and then Dev's desire to break free from the suffocating traditions and a lot of the cultural expectations. So I'm curious as to what drew you to building this dynamic between Naomi and Dev? Like, where did the inspiration come from?
I think, I grew up in a really homogenous small town. I had South Asian friends in larger cities, and we would go up to those larger cities to celebrate certain religious holidays or just visit with other families. But there's always this weird sense of, being around them and feeling like, this is easier. I can talk about things and I can relate to these people so easily. Whereas back home, I just always felt like an outsider. And I think Naomi has a very similar type of perspective on where she fits in amongst South Asian people. I think also a little bit that inspired this book is I myself am raising biracial children. And, there's so many things about my culture that I love, but I don't really know a ton about it, or I just don't feel like I'm the right person to always pass down traditions because I don't always have the knowledge. It was just something we did. If they were to ask why, I don't know. And it's almost like, I don't know, discomfort with feeling like my kids, they are South Asian. What does that even mean with me as their teacher?
Yeah, I definitely get that feeling too, especially like thinking about all the Chinese traditions, like festivals and like rituals that we do that, like, if I didn't have my parents tell me what to do, I would have no idea what to do during these festivals. And like the idea of like wanting to pass this down, but also not sure of all the details.
And also like diasporans, we make some of those holidays our own. Like they're probably unrecognizable to the people in the motherland. Probably like, what are you guys eating? What is this? This is not how we dress for this specific holiday. Or you're like meshing other regional cultures with our own, and it's very distinct. And it's like, well, we are a diaspora, we are a melting pot, and we kind of have to cling to each other. Otherwise, we're outnumbered, I guess.
Yeah, and I think there's also a little bit of an element of like whatever our parents taught to us is frozen in time, right? Like,
yeah,
they're over here. They don't know how their country of origin is changing, modernizing, developing new perspectives. They remember probably with nostalgia what they remember. They pass it down to us and it gets skewed, as you mentioned. And does it even really match what's going on, quote unquote, back home? I hate saying that because what is home? But there's also that frozen in time element that's kind of tricky and complicated.
Yeah. I mean, on that note, one of the recurring themes in your story is how in these, your story takes place in a very conservative, traditional, like South Asian community. And in these communities, like a lot of toxic culture gets carried down because, we come from, I think all of us on this podcast come from like cultures that are traditionally very patriarchal, very like conservative, right? And wanting to break those toxic cycles may end up causing us to kind of sever our ties to our culture and even our family, which is something that a lot of us in the diaspora struggle with, and a lot of your characters struggle with as well. I mean, your book does approach this, but what are your thoughts on how people can approach this, and have you been able to kind of reconcile this in your own life as well?
Oh man, we're getting deep. I
know, right? Deep cuts.
Like I'll talk to you and then I'm going to go to see my therapist. I think it's so tough, in order like to cut those ties, to question things that, especially when your parents cling so closely to some beliefs or ways of doing things, like sometimes you almost have to get to a point where you're not always fighting an uphill battle, like in general, I want to live in harmony with people. I feel like I can't fight the good fight every day. I'm too tired. So it's rough. I mean, all I can think of, I can do better for myself and I can do better for the next generation, hopefully. But it's hard, and sometimes I find, in conversations with my parents, specifically to my mom, I don't understand her logic. And sometimes there is none with some of the traditions she believes in, the way to treat your husband, the way to be a good wife and a woman. And it's hard. And I have to say, I'm a little nervous about some of the opinions she might see when she reads this novel. She hasn't read it yet. And I am terrified.
Yeah, like the mothers in your book, I think they're very intriguing characters. Naomi's mother, Supriya, or she goes by Sue, she is more free-spirited, but she's also like very uncompromising about sharing her family history and cultural traditions with her daughter. Meanwhile, Gia, Dev's mother, like she is very entrenched in traditions and also like very involved, shall we say, with the daily lives of her children. And it really like made me question, okay, like can Asian families do boundaries with each other? And how do they define boundaries? And with each generation, it like how do boundaries differ? So I'm curious as to like hearing your opinion on like setting boundaries with like Asian families, and do you think that there is, I guess, room for improvement with the next generation?
I don't know about you two. Like, I never got to a point where I feel like my parents look at me and see an adult. You know, I think that lack of boundaries is an issue because they will always see me as their child. And I guess I am, but it almost feels like a little bit in them is we have so much we still have to teach her. And she doesn't seem to be learning, you know, like it's a little bit, I don't want to say it's like infantilizing, but they're still my parents. I grew up around people who are like, oh yeah, my parents are my friends now. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to happen to me. I respect my parents. I have so much respect and admiration for the life they built for themselves. But again, sometimes with boundaries, you just have to pick your battles. And this is me, obviously. I'm aware that I am a tired, maybe lazy person now that I think about it. But it's different for every person. It's gotten a little bit easier since I had kids. I feel like they're a bit more, okay, she needs to raise her kids. You know, they spend a lot of time with my children and they probably undo all the work I try to do with my kids when they're in their care. But I do feel there's a little bit of like, okay, now she needs to set up this life because she is responsible for these kids, not us. So maybe there's a little bit there. But in general, you know, I just, like I said, I want harmony. And if that means maybe not having all my boundaries respected, I just recently tried to put one up with my mom and we got in a little bit of an argument. And then she was like, oh, I'm cooking and I can't talk about this now. So we'll talk later. And then she forgot. So maybe that's the key. Just wait till they forget. And then hopefully that boundary has been set by default. I'm not sure.
I mean, like for me, I feel like I'm parenting my parents more every single day. I don't know if it's because the world has changed so rapidly with like technological advances, but it's just like, okay, we need to emotionally regulate. Like we can't just, bury things underneath. Or, I mean, like if you're going to bury things, you're going to bury things. But however, like do not get mad at other people. Do not like express your anger and frustration because you don't get your way. I don't know if it's the same with you, Marv.
I mean, I kind of feel like it's also like you mentioned, Aurora, like our parents immigrated here. I don't know when your guys' parents immigrated. My parents immigrated in like the early 80s. Like we were coming from my family's from Taiwan. I think they had just lifted martial law at that point after like 30 years. And so, my parents came from a very already conservative type of like mindset. And Asian culture back then, and I'm generalizing now for sure, but like they didn't have the language to approach things like mental health and stress and anxiety. And so there was no way for our parents to even know of those stress. Like in addition to the stresses of being an immigrant, in addition to being a child of immigrant in a school where like, you're dealing with other kids, right? Like I think being a diaspora child of an immigrant is definitely it's not unique because there's so many of us, but we all have to deal with like parents also learning about these things. And a lot of times we're the ones that have to teach them because we're the ones that actually like learn first.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there are some moments like my parents don't really talk about their past too much. So I tend to collect it in little bits and pieces. And some of the stories my mom or my dad will tell me, but especially my mom who, had my parents immigrated in the late 80s. And I was born here. My mom flew here 9 months pregnant with me from Zimbabwe because she wanted her daughter to have Canadian citizenship. And she was alone. Like that act alone, I just think about some of the things they went through and how they had to go through it. They didn't have resources. They didn't have friends. In my mom's case, she didn't have a great command of the English language, and my dad was already working full time. So she's by herself all day with a newborn and a 4-year-old. So yeah, it's pretty incredible when you think about it. And I tried to show that in Sue and Gia in my book, because I do think it's rough out there and they do the best they can. Like, and really, if you look at it as far as they go as mothers, that's all we can really do is like, do the best you can, right? Like, I'm sorry in advance, but we're just trying to get by and like, take care of our families.
Yeah, I mean, definitely not. It doesn't excuse the damage, but also understanding where they come from is a big step. And just the fact that they'll probably never admit that what they did was wrong anyway. So you just have to live with it, right? If you want a relationship.
My mom forgets. She conveniently forgets all the things that had me in tears for years. And I'm just like, how wonderful for you, mother. Like, genuinely forgets. I don't think she's just avoiding the conversation. So, and
selective memory.
Yeah, that's the key to survival.
So not only is there fake dating in your novel, but Naomi like kind of fakes it till she makes it with her Bengaliness. And I think all diasporans at one point or another kind of feel like we're an imposter because we are naturally straddling two different cultures and we're constantly grappling with, am I Asian enough? Am I American or Canadian enough? So I'm curious as to hearing, was there ever a time you felt like you weren't Bengali enough? Because you mentioned earlier that when you grew up in a white majority town, and that's a different feeling from being a part of a South Asian community and feeling like you don't belong there.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I certainly don't feel Bengali enough. And I'm reminded by it. Sometimes family members will make jokes. Like a lot of my family
jokes are not funny.
Yeah, they're not funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like dead faced and they don't even notice when they're cracking these jokes. But most of my family in Canada are immigrants or were immigrants. So yeah, there's definitely like she's Canadian. But on the flip side, I don't feel Canadian all the time. I think I'm asked at least once a week, hey, where are you from? And if I say, I grew up in small town Alberta, that's not good enough. And I know every person who does not look like the majority deals with this. I know it's kind of like a tired joke that never goes away. And it's really unfortunate.
Yeah. I mean, like, Naomi, she doesn't reveal that she's Bengali to Gia because there's all these expectations. She's like, okay, well, I can't speak Bengali. I do not know the customs. So I'm just going to be like disappointing her. So it's better to just hide it. And I'm just like, yeah, I feel that. I feel like that is a very relatable experience to a lot of diasporans who kind of feel cut off from their motherland culture. So I thought you depicted that pretty well. And it made me wonder, like, how much do we owe other people, like, our cultural heritage? And how do we, how do we define our identity outside of race? And, like, how do we allow people to kind of see past that? I want to hear your opinion on those.
I feel like it's exactly a question I ask myself a lot while writing this novel. How much of ourselves do we owe other people in terms of culture, and other things too, like your financial status, your sexual orientation? Like, is it anyone's business to, learn that stuff about you? Because I often feel when I tell people, like, yeah, my family's from Bangladesh, like, you can see a change in their face. They do start making assumptions, negative or positive. I don't know. But it's a strange kind of, now they've linked some information from their brain to me that might not be true. In Naomi's case, like, if you don't feel like a Bengali person, do you have to tell people you are? Is that any of their business? I'm not quite sure.
this reminds me of like a less like dour example, but like when you're out in the markets or like I forget where I was, but I remember my dad saying, "Don't speak Chinese to the vendors. They will try to
swindle you,
or they will try to like get you to like do a friend deal, right? So like just pretend that you're just American, you don't speak Chinese, and you'll probably get a better deal." I think we're looking for a car. I think we were car shopping. And we were at a dealer with like a lot of Chinese car salesmen. And we were like, just, okay, don't speak Chinese. Like they're going to try to like uncle you, even though you're not related.
I feel like with me, people can tell right away that I'm American because I do have an accent when I talk in Korean. But regardless of that fact, I'm a very opinionated person. I'm very blunt. Marvin can attest to this. And it has nothing to do with me being American. But when I go overseas and they see how straightforward and blunt I am, they're like, oh, that must be because you're American. And I'm like, no, this is just my personality. It has absolutely nothing to do with the environment that I grew up in. But thank you. I will take that as a compliment. Yeah. So I do want to get into like the arranged marriage stuff, because that's the reason why Dev and Naomi are doing this arrangement where they're pretending to be dating to thwart off potential brides for Dev. And Vera Auntie, the matchmaker, who shares pretty much the same name as me, but with a different consonant, like she tells Dev that marriage is about the big picture. And what works in dating is not what something is going to work in marriage. Like what puzzle pieces that are fitting in now, it's a question of like, is it going to survive in the future? So very different requirements. Do you agree with Vera Auntie's advice? And also like, for the readers out there who's not like familiar with South Asian arranged marriage customs, what do you hope they take away from reading your book?
I mean, obviously it's a romantic comedy. So I probably was a little light and maybe like too joking about things that are really serious in traditionally. South Asian matchmaking is a very long time honored event still going on. My brother, who was, raised in Canada, he's had an arranged marriage. Going back to that specific chapter where she's trying to explain to him, marriage is not necessarily the same as dating, which I agree and I don't agree. I think it's funny, when you're dating and even when you're thinking about marriage, there are some things in South Asian matchmaking that seem ridiculous, religion, political views, maybe some things that people don't talk about a ton when you're in love, you're having fun, you enjoy someone's company, but they do start to matter when you're a family and you're married and you're stuck together. And, it does matter. And I guess what I'm trying to convey in this book is it's a tradition that sometimes doesn't make sense, but I don't necessarily think it's wrong. I think it has a lot to do with parents trying to help their kids find a good match. It doesn't always work, but neither do love marriages. It's not wrong. It's not right. It's just one way. And I don't know, I think it's never a bad thing to sometimes get advice or be steered in a direction by maybe someone who has lived through something or has, experiences and wisdom to share. My brother's still happily married. I was very against their arranged marriage when it first happened. They got married, they met and got married within a week.
Within a week? Wow, that's pretty fast for even an arranged marriage. Yeah.
Yeah, because, he had to come back home. So they were like, well, you're here, let's get married. You like her? And they're still together and they're a family. So, I guess I want to offer a sense of hope, I guess, to people. It's more than just the fun dating aspects. It's more than just what's on paper and what you think will work out with a person. It's a choice to love someone and also to stay in love and stay happily together. Or so I believe. Like, what do I know? Right?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get that the main conflict with Dev is just like he didn't choose this, like it's being forced upon him, which is why he's like fighting tooth and nail. And this book is a fun rom-com. Like, they do fun fake dating rom-com stuff, and in return for helping Dev like shoo away his potential matches, he has agreed to, I guess, give Naomi a crash course in Bengali culture. And, this occurs through a series of like cultural lessons, essentially like dates, where they go into a lot of fun cultural things. Can you talk to us about how you came up with those date ideas? Like, did you do any, was there hands-on research involved, or is it stuff like you are familiar with?
A lot of it was things like I did growing up. And, I think from what I've seen, I can only talk about my own experiences, but I've just found a lot of the South Asian events I've been to are so inclusive and wonderful and colorful. And I just love that aspect about it. Like, everyone is there to celebrate. And it just reminds me of that time that, like, when I got married, my husband, he's like Canadian, settler Canadian, like they're old school. He's got a huge family, and they were so excited for our wedding because, first time they've been to a non-Catholic, I think maybe non-Caucasian wedding. And so they were very excited. And my dad was like, we're going to get a sari for every single one of his aunts. That was like 15 people. He had my relatives running around in India buying saris according to their measurements and then sending them over. And because he wanted them to feel included and, to like add to this aesthetic of like families joining together and everyone's welcome. So yeah, that a lot of it is inspired by, just those wonderful moments that I've witnessed and how I feel when I'm at these kinds of things.
I mean, it definitely reminded me of, your book is contemporary and it's nowhere near like the Regency era, but I was just like, yes, the ball and and kind of like the makeover scene where the guy buys like the heroine's dress and everything. I was like, yes, I see like the Pride and Prejudice with the 2000s rom-com with the makeover montage. I freaking love it. I gobbled it all up. But like the reason why like Dev is kind of hesitant to go along with the whole arranged marriage schemes by his mother is because he's seen how his parents' marriage kind of panned out. He's aware that Bengali culture is, it has patriarchy, and that his mother really spent her entire life catering to his wishes and demands. And he really didn't see how it was beneficial for her, really. And even though he knows this, like, he seems to struggle with standing up for his mother, especially when it comes to like his chauvinistic brother, Neil, who kind of have embraced all the patriarchal customs from Bengali culture. So how is it writing a male character who's like self-aware of like the toxicity of the culture, but also like, I still embrace it. Not embrace it, but it's like, this is how it is, and is kind of passive with it.
It was a bit liberating to write that perspective of like, I don't want to continue these traditions myself. If that's what marriage is, if that's what being a husband is, then that's not for me. And it felt nice from a very feminist point of view of like, yes, question everything you know and then beat yourself up about it a little bit, because that's the first step to doing better. But I think, and I think this is true of all children of immigrants, like you learn to operate in the space you live in. And unfortunately, in the novel, at the start at least, Dave is living at home, and his mother is still grieving in her own way. Like he's got to get along. And I think sometimes it's hard for people to find their voice and, we're not all strong and opinionated like Rira, I guess. At least not myself. So sometimes it takes a while to find your voice. It's really important to me that eventually Dave did stand up to his brother and he did stand up to his mother, you know, and he still does it in his quiet kind of way. It's not like a moment of like, you know, conflict and violence. It's a moment of, you know, hey, this is what I want and this is what I'm going to do. And let's learn to be flexible around each other so we both kind of get what we want or think what's best. So I really enjoyed writing Dave. I feel like he's maybe not the dreamiest of guys because he's so awkward, but I like him.
Yeah, his accountant jokes, I was like, ooh, I don't know if it will work on the other ladies, but Naomi is better than me.
All right. I have more of a craft question. I'm always curious. So because I did not grow up reading, you know, capital R romance books. And, you know, this story is a rom-com, but also like capital R romance. And, you know, there is I guess in my like experience, pretty lengthy love scene in the middle of your story. And just curious because, you know, we actually don't talk to many romance authors on the podcast. How do you plan out those? Like, do you have like, is there a way to like map out, like plan out those sequences? Do you just like go with the flow? Like, what goes into writing like a 7-page love scene?
So I'm assuming you're talking about chapter 18 and 19.
Yes.
For those of you who are going to like, you know, flip to the naughty bits, those are the chapters. In the romance world, my book is called a slow burn. So generally that means there's a lot of tension build up. It takes a little bit of time to get to that 7-page intimate scene. And that was in an earlier draft. That was not actually how this story laid out, but I got advice from mentors and critique partners that this would be better as a slow burn. So a little bit was thinking about the genre, the industry, the story. So a slow burn is where we went. I will admit, I write these scenes and I enjoy writing intimate scenes. And then I read them and I am just shocked and appalled with myself. I can't believe I wrote that. I can't believe it. It's on the page and I wrote those words. Yeah, it shocks me. But, you know, in a romance, the general rule is it's not just a sex scene. It's supposed to push the story forward. It's supposed to do something for plot, character development, for the romantic tension. So I know romance has that history of, you know, the half-bared breasts on the cover and, you know, it's going to be good, but there is intention behind it to like build this relationship and take the reader really deep into, you know, the not just the sexual aspect, but the emotional, the mental, and, you know, really explore and dig deep with your characters basically to draw the reader in.
Yeah, I mean, the formula of romance, like happily ever after romance novels is like, okay, yeah, you build up the tension and then halfway through, it's like that tension combusts and you get the couple together and then something drives the couple apart. And you wonder if they're going to get back together again. But of course they're going to get back together again. That's the comfort of the genre. You like know that the couple will have a happily ever after ending. Which, funny enough, like I've seen this discourse on TikTok on like, oh, is it a romance if it doesn't have a happy ending? If it doesn't involve the main couple getting together? And I was like, yeah, I do wonder, like, maybe that's just like a book with romantic elements and not really considered romance. Like, what's your opinion on that?
I think according to the publishing industry, if you want to be under the little romance heading in the bookstore, the library, you have to have a happily ever after. There have been epic fights about this online.
Oh, yeah, I've seen. Yeah.
It is what it is. It needs to have the happily ever after, if only to know where to shelve your book. And I personally like it. I find it, as you said, comforting. And I don't know. When I read a novel that has this love story that I'm rooting for and they don't end up together, a part of me dies. Like, I'm just so disappointed. I need the comfort of, love. It's wonderful.
Yeah, you like invested your time and energy into this relationship. It's like a parasocial relationship at this point. And it's like, if the ending isn't happy, then you're like, why did I spend so much energy?
Yeah, this is how people develop trust
rooting
issues, for sure.
Exactly.
Well,
I just need
it's
like one thing.
Like, I forgot which movie it was, but there was like this movie poster and everybody on like Twitter was saying, oh, this is one of those romance movies where like one of them dies because they're giving off like sad vibes where they're like parted. And it's just like, yeah, if someone did that to me in like say if you like go to a rom-com, like you go to a theater thinking that you're getting a rom-com, but it turns out that one of them dies and it's a sad time movie. It's not great. You feel swindled. So yeah.
Like this is not what I paid for kind of feeling. Yeah.
But we are winding down to the end of the interview. This was your debut novel. Do you have another book in the works, or like what are you working on right now? Are you allowed to talk about it?
I am allowed to talk about it vaguely. So I'll try my best. I'm generally a person who spills all the tea, so I'll try. It is the first draft is written, so I'm in the editing process with my editor, and I'll just apologize to her now because her edits are sitting in my inbox and I've been ignoring them for weeks. So yes, it is a standalone novel. I always feel weird classifying my own work as rom-com because I'm like, what if it's not funny? But it is a romance. I'm sure it'll be marketed as a rom-com. And it's in the same world as Naomi and Dave's story. It includes a character from Sunshine and Spice and their, journey to finding love. I'm sure you can just guess because everyone who's been in my inbox lately has guessed correctly. But yeah, that's what I'm working on. And I believe it's going to come out in 2025.
Awesome.
Nice.
Well, congrats on the launch of your debut, and congrats on the upcoming book. It was really great chatting with you. Thank you so much for joining us on Books and Boba.
Thank you so much. I had so much fun. I've been listening to your podcast for a couple of weeks now and just been like, oh, I'm just so excited to talk about these types of things. So awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks. And that was Aurora Palit. Her debut novel, Sunshine and Spice, is available now at booksellers everywhere, including, as always, the Books and Boba bookshop. If you'd like to support our book club as well as your local bookstores, head on over to booksandboba.com and check out our bookshop link. We really appreciate it. Before we go, Rewa, can you remind us what our book club pick is for September 2024?
Yeah, so we are currently reading A Burning by Megha Majumdar, and it follows 3 characters in the aftermath of a terrorist attack at a railroad station in a Kolkata slum. So it is more of a political thriller, and it is a change of pace from our last novel, which was, slow burn and, a kind of slice of life. This time, lighting the fuse to a literal bomb, I guess.
Yes. And for those of you reading along with us, and please let us know your thoughts either on Discord in our weekly read-along or on Goodreads. As always, we love to include your feedback on our book club discussion episodes whenever possible. But yeah, thank you once again to Aurora Palit for joining us on Books and Boba. And thank you all for listening. We'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Books and Boba. This podcast was hosted by Marvin Yue and Rewa Yu and edited and produced by Marvin Yue. Follow the book club on Twitter and Instagram by going to @BooksandBoba and engage with us on Goodreads on our Goodreads group. You can also check out past episodes of the podcast by going to booksandboba.com and by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget, you can support Books and Boba and Asian American authors by purchasing books at our bookshop.org account. Check out the link in our show notes and also at booksandboba.com. Books and Boba is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts featuring unique voices and stories from the Asian diaspora. Learn more about the collective and check out our fellow Potluck shows by visiting the website podcastpotluck.com. Thanks for listening.
Brian. Did you go to Saturday school as a kid?
I sure did. Did you?
Totally.
Well, at our podcast, Saturday School, we don't teach a language, but we pass along the culture that we do know.
And that's Asian American pop culture.
Ada's a journalist, and I'm a professor and film festival programmer.
We've watched a lot of great Asian American movies, and we want you to watch them too. Come listen to us as we look back at the pioneering films that have led us to today.